Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members and guests. Welcome to the 115th season of the Empire Club of Canada. And my name is Kent Emerson. I'm the president of the Empire Club of Canada and your host for this evening, featuring Canada's fresh political voices, the first in our federal election series. I'd like to begin by offering thanks to our generous sponsor for this evening, Navigator. Thanks, Navigator, for sponsoring this. And also to the National Post and Toronto Sun Media as our media partner. And also to mediaevents.ca for webcasting today's event. Without great sponsors like these events couldn't happen. We are also proud for a few special guests tonight. I know that the Ryerson Leadership Lab has sent some people out tonight. I know there's 4 or 5. Why don't you stand up and a round of applause for some students here that have come out tonight. And I know there's some Empire Club board members here. I'm going to introduce Mike in a minute, but I see Antoinette here. I see Ziggy here. Anybody else tonight? There's Ziggy. Thank you guys for coming. And I just want to take a little bit of time to talk about our evening event series. It's something that started a couple years ago by Paul Fogel and a president. And it's grown in popularity, grown in concept. And the whole idea here is we come out, we have a few drinks, and eat a bit of food. And then we do a presentation, and we have some fun. It's a little more off the cuff than our lunches that are more traditional for our audience. And then we have some more drinks, and we have some more food. So don't go anywhere when this is over. No one's kicking you out. It's a networking event on purpose. And you can tell the nanny or whatever who's ever at home, you know, I'm staying out. We're having fun with the Empire Club. And we have another great event, some more great events this season that I'll mention at the end of the event. I also thought it would be appropriate to introduce Mike Van Solen tonight to explain why, first of all, why we've gathered here and with the purpose of this event. And there's 2 reasons. One is Mike's organized this event, and the second is Mike is nominated as president for the next season of the Empire Club, which begins in September. So provided the board members here don't vote against that, the committee's recommendation, because there's always this matter of democracy, which kind of gets, you know, in the way of things, right? So then Mike will be the next president, and I'm sure many of you know him. You know him from journalism. You may know him from politics. Maybe you know him from his life in public relations or his opinions on TV and radio, which I strongly disagree with. Just wanted to mention, I think this is a good time to bring it up. Okay. So I've gotten to know Mike over the year, and what I can say about him is he's a really great guy, and he's thoughtful in the way he puts ideas together, and putting this event together is one of those examples of that. And I'm really looking forward to you, Mike, and succeeding me in all kinds of different ways. Please welcome the 3rd Vice President of the Empire Club of Canada and Managing Principal at Navigator, the next President of the Empire Club, Mike Van Solen.
Well, thanks, Ken, for the very kind words. It'll be exciting and a little nervous to follow in Ken's footsteps. He's been a fabulous president of the Empire Club, but thanks again for the kind words. And good evening, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces here, so that's exciting for us, and I know it's going to be a great event. And we're here to talk about a pretty important issue, but I was going to kind of begin by talking about something else that I think is important. And that's the Game of Thrones finale from earlier this week. Now I assume you guys are all caught up on the finale, and it certainly seems as though everyone has watched it. It's the talk of the office. We hear it on social media. Certainly barrels of ink have been spilled talking about whether the finale stacked up or it didn't. And it seems to have been a cultural moment, I suppose, for a generation. But actually, the Game of Thrones only achieved 19 million viewers. That might sound like a lot, but it's really not. And that tells us an important fact about the fragmentation of media today. And I think it tells us it's an important context for the discussion that we're about to have this evening. I like to myth bust about the Game of Thrones a little bit, in part because I'm not one of those people who's ever seen an episode of Game of Thrones. But I certainly know that which Adrian has bugged me about before. But I know the HBO executives were happy with it. We heard about that. And I think the fact that they marked it as a success sort of speaks to how hard it is to engage and get eyeballs today versus how it used to be. When you consider 15 years ago, Friends, for its season finale, they achieved, sorry, I got the number here. They got only Game of Thrones got a third of the number of eyeballs that Friends did 15 years ago, and then they only got 87 million less than MASH did 35 years ago. MASH's season finale was the high water mark. No one's ever surpassed it as far as the number of eyeballs that there were. And of course, they achieved that number in a pool of people that was much smaller than what there is today. And I expect at the time MASH's finale was out there, it felt like everybody had seen the show. But the fact was that then everybody did see the show, and unlike Game of Thrones, where we live in a different world. But tonight's panel is about politics. It's about the way political conversations are going to unfold in the next federal election. And I make the point about Game of Thrones because just like the entertainment industry has changed, the news industry is changing as well. People are getting their information from ever more diverse sources. Politicians can't count on Canadians all tuning in to CBC The National each evening to get information about the day's events and the day's activities in Ottawa. And of course, this has huge implications for political parties. It has huge implications for elections. And in some ways, it has implications for the workings of democracy itself. But in all that change, there's also opportunity, and I think it's that opportunity that tonight's panelists can speak most succinctly to. If there's a common theme among their panelists, is that they are all pioneers in navigating these fragmented audiences, the different tribes, and using different platforms and tools to engage and reach Canadians across the country. So let's get to our panel. And get the discussion started. I want to start by introducing the folks here. First, we have on the far left, we have Jeff Bolingal, good friend, curator of Ontario Proud, now BC Proud and Canada Proud as well. He's producing some of the fastest growing and most engaged content in the country today. He is the owner, importantly, of Mobilize Media Group, and he's doing great work. Sitting to his right is Taylor Scollin. He is the co-founder of North 99, a progressive independent advocacy group that reaches millions of folks. Next, we have Jasmine Paquel, who joins us from the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. She's the interim Ontario Communications Director. The CTF has long been a force in the Canadian politics, a savvy group that understands how to engage with Canadians, and I'm very pleased that she can join us tonight. Next, we have Rick Smith, author, friend, nonprofit leader. He's the executive director of the Broadbent Institute, and he has overseen the organization's push into new media with Press Progress. Rick also knows me as long as anyone in this room, and he can remember the days when I had long hair and was beating around doing my undergrad. Also, super smart guy. He did really important work around plastics and BPA, and I think we all owe him gratitude for that advocacy work. And finally, our distinguished moderator, a good friend, Adrian Batra, one-time Director of Communications to Rob Ford, Editor-in-Chief of the Toronto Sun, the queen of all media, the incomparable Adrian Batra. Let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And a good thank you. Good evening to all of you. I realize that coming after a long weekend and it's kind of terrible weather outside, being away from your family and having a long day at work is perhaps not necessarily the place you want to be is out and about, but we promise to engage you, invigorate you, and hopefully give you a few things to walk away with, a little bit of food for thought. So welcome, and thank you to the Empire Club for hosting this event here. A special welcome to our friends Rick and Taylor to the Albany Club. Maybe you will find the sacrificial rooms upstairs. I can't imagine that you're in this club very often, but welcome nonetheless.
Never been.
And the irony was not lost on me that Jeff Bolingal is sitting to my left. So this is going to be an important This is an important conversation that we're having in this country, and hopefully we will have on this stage this evening in front of all of you. If anybody knows about being disrupted in the media industry, it's me in the newspaper business. And we are sitting with 4 individuals here who are prepared and have been engaged in disrupting in the sort of political establishment in their own way. So with all of that, and in that context, they come from different sort of political ideologies and philosophies, even though none of them directly belong to a political party. So we'll dive into that right away. And I'm going to start on my left with you, Mr. Bolingal, and please, for any of the panelists, feel free to jump in. And just sort of a housekeeping note, ladies and gentlemen, we will take questions from you if time remains, and so just jot something down, or I believe someone will pick up a note from you if you have a question you'd like to ask the panelists. I will endeavor to get it to you. And if you want to follow us along on social media, it's #Empire Club. Very easy. It's right there. So, Jeff Bolingal, I used the term disruptor when I first started talking about all 4 of you. Do you view yourself as a disruptor in terms of a media company, social media, partisan, political? How do you view what Ontario Proud has done, and now ultimately going into a federal election, what Canada Proud will do?
Sure. So I certainly think we do. Well, our work is certainly disrupting a lot of people, a lot of mainstream political parties, a lot of mainstream politicians, mainstream publications. I think people are hungry for something new and different. And finally, because of social media, we're able to do and say things that others can't. Not just in our tone of content, but in our ability to just get our message out. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if you wanted to reach millions of people, you had to have a printing press or a TV station. And when I started Ontario Proud, I started it with no money. And I started it with memes and links and jokes and videos. And suddenly, because we're talking about an issue that really resonated at the time, which was hydro prices in this province, our message grew like wildfire. Now things are changing every day with Facebook's algorithm. It's harder and harder to start something new. I was lucky. I did it at a time where you had that ability. But we're doing something that's different. We're reaching a ton of people in a time where traditional media is declining, if not collapsing. And our message works because it resonates. People like what we're doing. Some people really hate it, but there are enough people like it that it works. And so I feel like what we're doing is very disruptive, and we're going to be continuing to do so.
Taylor, North 99, the organization that you were with, is described as a non-for-profit, progressive content and opinion organization with the goal of shifting public opinion and making Canada a more fair, equal, and inclusive country. You're nonpartisan, and you do not endorse political parties per se. However, you do have a particular political side of the spectrum that you would tend to support. I want to sort of pose a similar question to you. As an advocacy organization, how have you viewed sort of the traditional media, but going into this, part of the premise of why we're here is going into the next federal election. How do you anticipate your organization injecting itself and still maintaining the core values and principles that you have?
Yeah, well, our mission is really to shift opinion in a progressive direction. Mm-hmm. And like you said, we're a broadly progressive organization. And the way I describe it to people is that our goal is to expand the boundaries on the left of what is politically viable and politically possible. And we do that in a variety of ways, many of which Jeff also does with his Proud Network pages. And in other ways too, by doing polling that talks about issues that people are not necessarily discussing in the discourse. We did, I think, the first poll in Canada on the Green New Deal, for example. And now that's something that's being talked about more and more. So I think we have a role to play in expanding the boundaries of what the political parties can talk about, because we can say things and do things that they're not able to yet.
Jasmine, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has been around for a very long time. It's an organization I'm quite familiar with, having been the former Manitoba director. One of the things that is always knocked against the CTF is that You are just ostensibly a shill and an arm for the Conservative Party of Canada, any right-wing sort of political party. I would always counter that by saying, no, we're equal opportunity flamethrowers. It doesn't matter who's in power. And I'd like to say that about the Toronto Sun, too, sometimes. I want to ask you, I know that you're new in this role as the Ontario director, but you now have, some colleagues that are in the same space you are in now. How much do your campaigns, the CTF's infamous, we've all seen it, the debt clock that goes around across the country or around a province, how have you found the impact that your organization has made in, either changing government policy or, frankly, changing a government?
The CTF has been extremely impactful. I think in election campaigns, we tend to get swept away with these grandiose ideas that sound wonderful in theory, but no one can afford. As you mentioned, I'm the Ontario director, so specifically holding Doug Ford to account. This was a government that came in saying that there was respect for taxpayers, and yet we see that the budget in Ontario is not going to be balanced until after the end of his mandate. Very convenient. And likewise, we're the largest subnational debtor. There's a lot of work to be done. So I'd say that the CTF is the voice of reason, really, in an election campaign, and our debt clock really does bring that conversation of just what's reasonable, what can we afford, back into the conversation before we all kind of get swept away with different political promises.
Rick, my question is going to be very similar to you with the Broadband Institute. Notice how we did this left, right, we kind of planned it that way. Yeah, it was a little bit planned that way. The Broadband Institute not only engages in sort of the political discourse, but you actively go out and you commission studies and reports and research to buttress the policies that you would like governments to implement and employ. I mean, of course, Ed Broadbent was well known on what would be the left side of the political spectrum. But this is, again, an opportunity in this conversation that we're having right now for your organization to be part of significant change. So how do you see your role versus, say, Jeff Bolingal's role, for example?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're right and Jeff is wrong, for starters. But before I get in, if I could just take a second, I just wanted to thank you very much. I turned 50 last year, and you've deemed us the fresh political voices here. And I just wanted to thank the Empire Club very much for that.
50's the new 30.
Because I tell my kids all the time that I'm not that old. And so the Empire Club has now confirmed that for my children. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, we do a few things at the Broadband Institute. We really do three things. We try to pump out good policy ideas, both proactively and reactively, trying to go toe-to-toe with dumb conservative ideas. We do a lot of training of up-and-coming leaders across the country, and then we run Press Progress as an online kind of daily newsroom. It's a little newsroom and has a morning meeting every day, and we try to pump out good news stories. So we, more than anything, we're in the ideas business. Like a lot of folks on the stage, I mean, we have a different role to play in the political process. We're not really interested so much in the news cycle of the moment, but we try to take a longer view and try to make sure that our ideas gain traction over the longer term.
So why not just be a part of the NDP? Why not just be part of a political party? And the same question to all of you, actually, but I'll let you go first, Rick.
Well, we have a different role to play, and we're in the ideas business as opposed to the getting people elected business. And I think there's a real need for that. Frankly, we were set up 7 years ago, and as Canadian progressives, we kind of came late to the game. There's a long tradition of cross-issue progressive policy organizations in the US, not so much in Canada. The conservative movement, to its credit, really got ahead of us. The Fraser Institute, founded in the 70s, Manning Center, we're, of course, a Fraser Institute for good, not evil. So we were late to the game, but we've been trying to catch up. And we can go toe-to-toe with conservatives and conservative movement organizations in a way that the political parties can't, and engage in that daily combat of ideas in a way that political parties can't.
So Jeff, our friend Rick here has taken a lot of shots at the center right, the conservative movement. I mean, I think you would be arguably the most representative in terms of an organization that is helping the conservative movement through the things that you are doing. Do you find, though, that you're piercing through versus what the extreme left at the Ed Broadbent Institute is doing?
I think so. I think a lot of people are in a Toronto-centric, Ottawa-centric bubble. And I always try, when I try to talk about politics, I always try to talk about politics in a way that my aunt would understand. So simplified, accessible, digestible, relevant, relatable. And we try to mix up our tone too. So we don't want to just be angry. We don't want to just be shocked. We don't want to be just disgusted. So we try to use humor. You don't want to be just the drunk uncle at the dinner table. So when we talk about a litany of issues beyond just politics, we try to inject culture. We want to bring in people into the conversation and then try to influence their opinion on Justin Trudeau or in the past Kathleen Wynne in different ways. And we're always testing what works and what doesn't. The beauty of social media is that it's an instant focus group. You know instantly what works and instantly what does not. So that's the sort of thing that we're doing. We have to keep really abreast of what's going on with the tech giants and how their algorithms are constantly changing. And now we also have to worry about a prime minister who is not the brightest, but he's smart enough to know that we pose a threat to him. And they're trying to increasingly throw regulation on top of us that infringes on our right to free speech. But we'll see. We're pretty nimble, and that's the beauty of what we're doing is we're small and we're mighty, and we're flexible, and we're able to keep on going no matter what they try to stop us with.
I do want to talk a little bit about the digital charter that is coming up in a moment, but Taylor, is like with North 99, it's new-ish, and you're just kind of coming up and trying new things. How have you found it? I mean, we in what we call ourselves so-called legacy media, in the new media, in this new age, it's far easier, I think, to gain access to listeners, to readers, to people that will engage with your platform. So how do you guys at North 99 engage with your viewers, your audience?
Well, I think there's actually a lot to what Jeff just said, and I think it's the reason why we started North 99, which is because we saw that the right was dominating the online conversation, and the news feed, social channels is where a lot of people get their news. It's the primary news source for a whole range of demographics now, and we had sort of just abandoned the field to people like Jeff Bolingal, which is scary. And I think there's something to be said about his insight, which is that these channels are conducive to groups that can speak in plain, ordinary language to people. That's how you reach large audiences on those channels. And what we saw is that the left in Canada, but not just in Canada, really in a lot of Western countries, has been speaking to an increasingly stratified elite segment of the population. And because of that, it's sort of not doing well on Facebook, WhatsApp, all these channels that people are getting their information from. And we wanted to change that. So the way we approach it is by, I'm proud to say that I'm a populist leftist. We speak in populist, ordinary language. And I think that is really what drives success and effectiveness on these channels.
So just humor me. What exactly is a populist leftist?
Well, we believe, broadly that the rules of our society have been constructed by a wealthy elite and, probably many people who are members of this club. And it's time, thank you. And it's time that we take back control from from those people and return it to ordinary people, because that's what a healthy democracy looks like.
Okay. Glad you brought your own cheering stick. You needed backup coming into the Albany Club. I can respect that. You know, Jeff, one of my takeaways from that is he basically said you're a pioneer. So, I mean, that's helpful.
Oh, absolutely.
I would actually say that Taylor, like, we're friends socially too. I'd say we agree on a lot of issues. There's things about left-wing populism that I really like, that I think a lot of right-wing parties or the establishment in Canada won't talk about, that I think are ripe to talk about. And I think when it comes to problems in our society, whether it's cell phone bills or airline tickets, sometimes I just want, the conversation's just not being had. And so let's have the conversation, whether there are right-wing solutions or left-wing solutions to these things. We just talk about things.
Right.
But there are things that are just broken, I think, in Canada that everyone just established, like, we're just so complacent in this country that, like, oh, we just accept it.
Yeah.
You know, Union Station's been under construction for 15 years, and it's 3 years past its due date. No one talks about it, we just accept it. So these are the sorts of things that I just want to have the conversation about a lot of issues that we're just not having. And I credit whether it's Bernie Sanders or Taylor Skolin for at least bringing some.
Yeah, I
Bernie
think
Sanders is a bit better looking than Taylor,
yeah.
but
I think the notion that good public policy shouldn't be isolated to one side of the political aisle. But Jasmine, I want to bring you back into this conversation because with the organization and the members that you represent, their supporters. This is sort of where you guys try to, be an advocate on both sides of it. What Jeff is talking about in terms of the consumer protection, for example, or even what Taylor is referring to with holding governments accountable.
So, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying, Taylor, about standing up for, taking power back from wealthy, but I would actually say that one of our most popular campaigns at the moment is against the carbon tax, and that's simply because by number of petition signatures. I'm from southwestern Ontario, which is quite a rural area. I grew up on a farm, and back there you don't hear the same sort of support for these, high taxation schemes that are really popular in urban centers, but they really do hurt a lot of people. The little guy that you're speaking of. So. In terms of connecting with our supporters, our donors, the biggest issue for them is the carbon tax, because really they don't see that as, a tax is not a way to change the climate. It's just a scheme to put more money in government pockets. So in terms of connecting with them, I mean, they're the ones signing these petitions. They're the ones really driving, pushing the needle on that cause.
Rick, I know you're anxious to weigh in on some of the things that have already been said, so please go ahead.
Well, I wanted to jump in this notion of populism and what is left populism, what's right populism. And I think one key difference is both the left and the right in the populist sphere anyway kind of agree that there's a lot of economic angst that people are feeling at the moment. I think where the left and the right depart from each other at the moment is what to do about that and who to blame. And you see an awful lot of, frankly, extremism in conservative politics these days in terms of pointing at immigrants, pointing at refugees. Though I like some of what I see on Ontario Proud. I mean, I'm all about beautiful Ontario waterfalls and the beauty of our countryside, which is a lot of your memes. There's a tendency in the conservative world these days to point fingers at people who are not responsible for the economic anxiety that other Canadians are feeling. So the right these days is increasingly anti-pluralist, and the left is not. And so there's no symmetry in our political debate at the moment. It's not like the right and the left are equally culpable for what's going on with politics at the moment. And that's a key difference, I think, in terms of what drives some of us on this stage.
So I'll pivot from that then and put this to you. Since we are having the conversation with respect to sort of the economic accountability that we've seen, the right, the so-called right, would argue that it's big spending left-wing politicians whom you've backed or you would advocate for, not you, the royal you, but in general. Big spending, big government, big deficits, big debt. where is the future accountability for taxpayers in the long term? Because to quote my friends at the CTF, today's debts are tomorrow's taxes. Someone's eventually going to have to pay. This is sort of the situation we find ourselves in Ontario, and ultimately we will find ourselves in Canada in the coming years, if they're not there already. So how then do, pardon?
I said, Jesus Christ, the amount of rhetoric here.
Well, that's part of it, though.
I would love to see people talk about issues based on knowledge and facts and information, as opposed to preconceived ideological positions. And I can't get that from the legacy media, and I can't get it from I don't do the hashtag stuff. I like to read. I haven't seen.
That's all we do.
But I think that's part of the point here is that these are the individuals that are actually making the impact and having that difference. So when we're more than happy to take questions from the audience in just a few short moments. But so Jeff, let me throw it to you then. So I gave my little preamble about the left, big spending, right, wanting to cut everything and perhaps we're more critical than necessary. So how do you pierce through that? How do you pierce through just being a right-wing advocate?
I think we want to talk about politics in a way that's digestible and relevant, something that's humorous. Whether it's Justin, things that do really well for us are emotive. So when Justin Trudeau is really hypocritical, when he talks about climate change and the need to put a price on pollution, and then he takes a government jet to Tofino to go surfing for the weekend, I mean, how does he rationalize that? And that's something we'll talk about. And I think it doesn't matter who you are. I think people should follow through with their commitments. I think climate change is a real big concern, and we should have leadership from our Prime Minister, and he should show that personally. But I don't think this panel should be devolving into left-wing, right-wing debates. I don't think we're going to settle anything by calling each other communists or fascists or anything like that. I think the opportunity we have right today is to discuss about what opportunities we have with new technology and how those opportunities have presented themselves with the decline of legacy media and the rise of mobile technology, whether it's cell phones and social media.
Yeah, well, we're not dead yet. But Taylor, it's an important point because you are able to do the things that so-called legacy media can't do. You guys have a sort of a wider berth with respect to the avenues you can use. You don't necessarily have unions around you. You don't have the accountability layers that legacy media does. Though you still can be held accountable for the stuff that you put out. So how do you guys pierce through sort of maybe some of the criticism that might come your way and say, well, this is just yet another sort of propaganda arm of the so-called progressives, and they want to just spend more of my money. And so how do you guys get your information for one thing and then disseminate it in a way that's fair?
Well, I think we're completely transparent and explicit about our point of view, which is that we have a progressive point of view. And I think that's no different than any other media outlet, including the legacy ones. Certainly the Toronto Sun has a point of view. Criticism is good. I welcome criticism, and we get lots of criticism. But we always strive to a standard of accuracy, I think, that people expect from us. And when we fail to meet that standard, we hear about it instantly from our own audience. What we found with, I don't know if this is true on the right side of things, but certainly on the progressive side of things, there is very little tolerance for inaccurate information, for misinformation. If we get something wrong in something we post, people get very upset about that. So there's really no advantage to us in trying to be anything but as factual as we can possibly be. And in terms of where we get our information from, I mean, we depend on traditional journalists and reporters to produce that original reporting, and I certainly think that that's a public good that needs to be supported. We're no replacement for that.
With so much out there and so many ways and means by which Canadians can consume, Jasmine, how do you take a very finite period of time that someone has to consume something, how do you make it impactful for them?
Well, that's really an interesting question, and I was actually going to go in the opposite direction, very much based on the question you just asked. So one idea that I brought with me when I came to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation was to really expand our podcast reach. And the reason for that is because I think there's a really deep appetite amongst Canadians for longer form conversations that are less combative, because I couldn't agree with you more. When you watch, the 6 o'clock news, sorry, legacy media, but when you watch that and you've got a panel of, people with combating views, you're not going to be moved. If you went in as a conservative, you're going to come out as a conservative, and vice versa across the entire political spectrum. So I think one really amazing trend that we're seeing that's just opening up a meaningful dialogue and less of an ideological one is this shift toward more long form media, like podcasts, where, I'm often, driving out of town a couple hours, or in town for that matter, but, you're driving, you put on a podcast, and you can listen about a topic for 2 hours, or you're cleaning your house on a Saturday. And you can really dive a lot deeper and have a much better understanding for the issue. So I'm glad to see that podcasts are emerging as a new important medium that I think the statistic was something like more than half of Canadians listen to podcasts once a month. So that's really encouraging, and I hope we'll break down this kind of very siloed political discourse into more a conversation of ideas. And not to be one of those panelists who talks too long, but another interesting development that we're seeing along those lines that's kind of conducive to the growth of podcasts has been the growth of the, they call it the intellectual dark web, which is kind of a silly term, but what it is a bunch of professors and intellectuals online, predominantly YouTube, of all different political stripes, including some Canadians like Jordan Peterson, but we've also got some scientists like the Weinstein brothers and more left-wing, right-wing, it doesn't matter, but they're all just committed to open dialogue that's respectful, with the goal of getting toward the truth as opposed to winning a political debate. So I think that those YouTube videos and podcasts, both long forms of media, are really important to getting beyond just siloed political discussions.
So let's sort of move forward and look to the next federal election, which is just a few short months away. One of the reasons why so many of these nice folks are here is to hear from all four of you how you'll be engaging in that next federal election, what you will be doing. And I mean, I'd prefer if you gave me away all your tactics, but you don't have to. But how will the Broadbent Institute, for example, be engaging Canadians in terms of what they think that you guys think that the ballot box question will be come October?
Yeah, I think the ballot box question is going to be something related to the economic anxiety that people are feeling, and what is to be done about it. So we will be trying to provide good ideas in that regard, try to make sure that the terrain is beneficial to progressives. And we're going to be doing some of what we just did in the Alberta election, which I was very proud of. We spent a lot of time doing some background research on UCP candidates in Alberta, and revealed some, frankly, really disturbing views from some of those candidates, and made sure that became part of the public debate. I mean, one of the reasons that we started Press Progress is we didn't think that the mainstream media, maybe it's because we're Canadian and we're all very polite and we're sort of conflict averse or something, but we didn't think that the mainstream media was paying enough attention to the increasing extremism on the conservative side of the fence. And so we unapologetically go after that on a daily basis, try to surface that, and point out how not normal those views are, and not mainstream in terms of the history of this country. So we'll be doing all of that and aiming all of that at the Conservatives over the next few months.
And arguably with some success, because some of those candidates were punted from lineup.
There were some very, we brought to light some very objectionable views, doing a lot of background research on the web, because nothing really dies online these days. I feel good about the fact that those folks are not in the UCP caucus. I think that's a credit to that's all good and good for Alberta and for the country.
Jeff, your organization is going to be, as I said earlier, you have now Canada Proud.
Yes.
You've taken what you've done in Ontario, and I believe in BC as well. You were in
BC, yeah. There's other. I was involved in Alberta Proud, which is was heavily
Yeah.
involved in the Alberta election too. But I don't manage that. They just hired me to help advise on it.
So there is expectation that you will very much be engaged in the next federal election. I mean, you've already mentioned a couple of things that you will be doing against Justin Trudeau, for example. But for your success, A, what do you believe the ballot box question is? And then how will your organization come up with facts that are fair and easily for Canadians to understand? And how would you measure success?
So I think the election's already on. I think elections are now won way before Election Day. Kathleen Wynne, it took 2 years of us hammering her weekly. We're reaching millions of people every week about every misstep Kathleen Wynne and our government made, that it built up a perception in people's mind. It was a motive, and we made Kathleen Wynne's, we helped make Kathleen Wynne socially unacceptable. And that's what we're trying to do against Justin Trudeau. So we've been doing that, thank you. I am in the Albany Club, I think, anyways. But that's what we're trying to do with Justin Trudeau, and we're doing it. I mean, we're reaching millions of people every week. We've done 13, almost 14 million video views since January 1st, and we haven't had to spend a lot of money doing it. Everything that Justin Trudeau does wrong, we're on top of it. I'll give a good example. A couple weeks ago, Justin Trudeau was with the Japanese Prime Minister, and he mixed up China and Japan twice. Really embarrassing for our country.
I didn't sleep all night.
Okay, thanks for your commentary. Really embarrassing for our country. If anyone knows anything about geopolitics, it's incredibly embarrassing. But the media, glossed over it. The CBC wrote a headline, China top of mind at Japanese talks. But we created memes, and we made fun of Trudeau. We showed him how really foolish he is. And hundreds of thousands of people saw that content without us spending $1 on it. So we're hammering Trudeau. I think we've had a big impact on his low polling numbers, and we're going to continue to do so. We've got some really creative plans, and we've learned a lot about what Press Progress did during the Alberta election, and so we're going to be really focused on research, but we're also going to do a lot of different things in the next few months, trying to create content that people want to be entertained by and informed by.
Yeah, I think that's actually a key to a lot of it, is people do want to be entertained. And again, such a short period of time to get their attention. So Taylor, with that sort of question I posed to the others, what do you believe is going to be the ballot box question, and how will North 99 be engaging?
Yeah, well, I agree with Rick. I think it'll be centered around the economic anxiety that a lot of people are feeling in this country. And I'll say I'm deeply concerned about the influence of the right online, not just the groups that Jeff has spun up, but there's a whole network of, some legitimate, some AstroTurf corporate-funded organizations, many funded by oil sands operators, who reach millions of people every week on Facebook, on YouTube, through other channels that nobody talks about. And nobody even sees it unless you happen to be in their audience, but their audience is enormous and they have an enormous impact. And they can do that because they've spent years investing and building those organizations, and that work simply has not been done at that scale on the left, on the progressive side of things. So I'm concerned that they will be able to define the ballot box question. And our job is going to be to try to make sure that doesn't happen, and to hold Andrew Scheer accountable every day for his views and his beliefs, which I think are well outside the Canadian mainstream, and push candidates to embrace the progressive policies that we feel that they need to embrace in order to defeat the Conservatives in 2019.
Ultimately, it's going to be about 30% of Canadians who are undecided that will probably ultimately decide who wins the next election. So how do you get to those 30%, Jasmine? How do you make an impact to them?
So, I mean, going back to what the ballot box questions then will be for that 30%, I think there will be 2 ballot box questions. The first will be a referendum on Justin Trudeau and his leadership. The second will be about the carbon tax. So to go to the first, Justin Trudeau, I don't think is running against Andrew Scheer. I think he's running against who Justin Trudeau was in 2015 and what our expectations were for him then. I mean, there's been a lot of mud thrown at him since then. There have been a lot of mistakes made. You know, Sunny Ways is almost now, maybe thanks to Jeff, I don't know, but a meme on social media because that's really not how Canadians feel about his leadership. So I do think it will be a referendum on him. Secondly, in terms of getting to that 30% with the carbon tax, you know, the 905, certainly in Ontario, is a big determinant of how this province swings. And, you know, they're commuting long distances, they're paying a lot in gas prices right now, and they're feeling the crunch. So I do think that you know, the carbon tax can really impact that swing vote there.
So we're going to take some questions from the audience, but one last thing I wanted to have all of you address, because it is top of mind and we're having this discussion right now, certainly in each of our newsrooms, and that has to do with this digital charter that the Prime Minister has proposed. Very little information around it. How do you think any of that, I mean, based on what we know, will that impact anything that you do, for example, at the Broadband Institute? Right?
I don't think so. I think it's just bizarre. I have no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
agree on
It seems like, yeah, we do agree on that. I just have no idea what that's about. And you know, at the end of the day, Press Progress is a news organization, so we're going to keep pumping out stories. And you know, I mean, the idea that the Prime Minister at this late date, a few months before the election, can in any disinterested way come out with this kind of tool is ludicrous. So it has to be seen in that light.
Jasmine?
So I agree. I mean, it was a really vague document that I don't think anyone knows what the heck it means. I mean, there was a little bit in there, and toward the end, that could raise some concerns about, okay, what does this mean for freedom of speech? What does this mean for, you know, in terms of government regulation of the media? Certainly on the heels of the media bailout, there's a lot of concern already. So I think it's one thing to acknowledge that this is a legitimate concern, and the government may or may not need to regulate these big tech players. It's to be determined. There haven't been any governments, you know, on this planet who yet have done so, I think, successfully. So, you know, will the Canadian government get it right? I don't think this charter does much on that front. Maybe they do need to regulate it, but I think what no one's talking about is the concern that, you know, if the government just makes laws willy-nilly, that can also have really negative repercussions as well. So we need to be really, really careful. You know, this is uncharted territory, and the government could do a lot of damage here if it makes laws recklessly.
And Taylor, of course, this is all under the premise of the so-called fake news and bad actors that may be trying to interfere in our federal election, or frankly, any of our elections. So any impact or any view from you on this so-called digital charter?
I don't see how it would impact us, and I have no strong opinion on it. I think we need to see more details.
Yeah, we need to see more details. I think some of it's actually really interesting. Some of it's about our own personal data with banking and how we can transfer that over, how that'll respond with fintech and competition. I think that's a discussion we need to have. Other parts I'm really concerned about with, you know, define disinformation, define hate. I think that could be very dangerous if we go down that Orwellian route. But as it stands now, I think it's a silly move from a silly Prime Minister.
Okay. I know we have some questions from the audience. Would you like to go first, sir?
I've spoken enough.
He's heckled us throughout.
Please tackle this one. Okay, yes, please, ma'am. Would you like to wait for them? Yes, it's coming right up.
Hi there, thanks for this discussion. Sonia Carino from the Interactive Advertising Bureau of Canada. And I just wanted to touch on the charter a little bit and in relation to your discussion around memes specifically. And this idea of when you start to, I guess, talk about the fact that Canadians want to be entertained, and creating memes and kind of slamming and sort of getting into the grill of the incumbent. How do you manage the perception of fake news? How do you certify the information that's being used, and how do you make that distinction? Are we starting to devolve, I guess, into just memery to inform Canadians on important issues?
Whomever wants to tackle that first, please.
So with our memes, there's clear ones that are jokes. Those ones we don't source. If Trudeau's saying, sushi is my favorite Chinese food, we're not going to source that. That's clearly a joke. But when everything else we do, we source it. We thoroughly source it. Obviously, we have our bias. Everyone has their bias. The Toronto Star has their bias. The Toronto Sun has their bias. So that's part of it. But I think in Canada, we have a huge vacuum for good political satire. I mean, 22 Minutes is the lamest thing. No one watches it. And outside of that, what do we have? Nothing. We don't have Saturday Night Live. We don't have Seth Meyers. We don't have John Oliver. We have nothing.
CBC comedy.
Oh, so good. Can't wait to watch it. No, but that's what's missing in our political discourse. I think I'm not a Trump fan, but I love listening to right-wing and left-wing voices talking about Donald Trump. I love that humor. I want to talk about politics. We should be making fun of politicians. That's an important part of democracy.
How do you certify the content that's in your bite-sized information?
We have, there's a difference between a meme and a graphic. Graphic, well, if it's more in depth, we source it. If we're stating a fact, like breaking news, this thing sort of happened, it'll say CBC News, July 20th, 2019.
So the short answer is they still source us in the legacy media.
Yeah, and I think, no, as Taylor said earlier, we're just expanding the media ecosystem. We're not replacing legacy media in that regard. We just have our role to play. And it's been going on all over Europe and in Britain and the United States. And Ontario Proud is actually modeled after a democratic group called MoveOn.org. That's my inspiration. It's not anything else.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Well, this notion of incorrect content, deliberately incorrect content, is a problem in the conservative world. It's not a problem for progressives. I mean, conservatives lie, and progressives don't. So, hashtag fake news was popularized by Donald Trump.
Boy, we really don't have that much time left for this room. Oh my goodness!
I was going to say,
wow.
But so again, there's no symmetry to this debate. It's not like it's. Yeah. So I think it's important that people are held to account for what they're pumping out online, and we're happy to be held to that standard.
Is there another? Yes. That's you. Microphone? Oh, is there a microphone?
Yeah. My question here is for Rick and Taylor. And when you look around the world, you look at sort of Brexit, you look at Trump getting elected, 5-star in Italy, Brazil, all of these sort of right-wing movements that are winning big. And I'm wondering if when you look at, is that a communications problem? And when you look at the Ontario Prouds and others, what do you see that they're doing right that you'd like to get in on? And why I'm asking that, Rick, when you talk about the candidates in Alberta, and I think Press Progress did some pretty groundbreaking work in terms of bringing down candidates, but Jason Kenney won 55% of the vote, so it didn't sort of shift the election.
Only.
And I'm just wondering, when you look at the right online, and what lessons are you pulling from that? And you think, is it a communications problem, or are voters more right wing? Where do you think that sits? And sort of to you and Taylor.
I think as progressives we need to become more muscular and aggressive online and with our activism generally. And one thing that we've certainly learned from Ontario Proud and others is that we need to get out there and we need to make our points in the most aggressive manner possible and reach way more people than we're reaching. I mean, this notion of populism and what lies at the root of it, and why are voters being driven to vote for parties like the 5-star movement, or we're going to see, I think, a very difficult European election result next week with right-wing populist parties really gaining ground. I agree with Taylor that we need to better define what a progressive populism looks like. We need to offer better solutions to people that are feeling pinched. And the fact of the matter is that the average Canadian has not had a raise since the mid-1980s. I mean, that's a statistical reality. So it's not people's imagination when they're sitting around their kitchen table. They're trying to figure out how to make ends meet, feel like they can't get ahead. And so far, conservatives have done a better job providing supposed solutions to those voters rather than progressives. And we need to better compete on that terrain.
Taylor?
I agree with that. I think the communications has to come second after substance, right? And what we've seen in a lot of these places where right-wing populism has ascended is that the traditional parties of the left, the social democratic parties, essentially stopped speaking to ordinary people. And they stopped offering a critique of the system which ordinary people correctly identified as no longer serving their interest. And so I understand why they voted for Brexit. I understand why people voted for Trump, because they were the only people that were speaking to their problems. So until we fix that, I think the communications is never going to work, but the communications also has to be something we tackle. And I think I alluded to that earlier in the way that we speak to people we have to meet people where they are, right? We can't expect to talk to people as if everyone is a grad student in political theory. Like, that's just not realistic, and it's never gonna work.
All right, we have time for 2 more questions. Yes, great.
Wait,
Yeah.
I've been waiting, sorry.
Oh, so
Yes, I have
I'm
been
sorry, I
waiting.
can't see. It's the lighting, and
Sorry.
I'm very short.
Hi, no worries. I just wanted to address some of the recent points that you made about language that's ordinary and simple to understand. And in the age of digital media, it means that we are very much more inclined to identify what's wrong. So I think given that, how do we start to create this narrative where we don't just identify the issues, but we also make the solutions easy to understand in an age of social media? Because I think it's important that if we have a list of wrongs, we also have a list of ways to address them that people can easily digest.
Jasmine, I think that you could probably address that. It's easy to point out the problems, but sometimes the solutions are easy, but how do you get Canadians or get anybody to appreciate them or understand them?
Can someone else start? I'm not really, to be honest, I'm still kind of trying. Like, one thing I guess I would say is you're right that when you watch the media, sometimes it seems like everything's going wrong. It's almost like a bias that you develop. But I mean, not to diminish that there are a lot of big issues this country is facing, but a book that I really enjoyed recently was by Steven Pinker called Enlightenment Now, talking about all of these trends that show that we're actually headed in a really great direction. Like, so many important metrics, not only in Canada, but in terms of across the world, in terms of quality of life, longevity, education rates, all of these things are really improving. But I mean, you don't see a reporter standing in a peaceful zone saying there hasn't been a war here in 100 years. So I think the media does often skew in our minds that, you know, things are going wrong, but there really are a lot of things that are going right. It's just not really clickbait.
Yeah, I think that's part of the issue.
I think things are going to hell in a handbasket.
I think we have a good
You're just
example
doom and
of
gloom.
this, actually.
Taylor?
I think there's a good example of this at work if you look at how the American left has responded to the climate crisis and how the government here has responded to the climate crisis. If you look at the signs that the kids who are part of the Sunrise Movement advocating for Green New Deal in the US, the signs they carry around say good jobs, livable future, right? Everyone can understand what that means. It's clear. Here, we talk about a pollution tax with a rebate, but you got to do the rebate on your taxes, and then there's some exemptions for people who, no one understands the solution, right? So I think it's absolutely critical that we communicate our positive priorities in a way that is also simple to understand, the same way we communicate our critiques.
I agree with that.
And I think to that end too, I think our legacy media, not to bemoan them even more, but I think in Canada, they're not really serving our interests. They're talking about insider baseball nonsense. You know, who used what stock photo during what campaign? No one cares. They're not speaking to people's everyday concerns and solutions to our problems. And I think American media is now adjusting. We've seen the decline of major US newspaper dailies, but then suddenly the Washington Post and the New York Times, they're doing really well. And one of the reasons I think the New York Times is doing well is they have a podcast called The Daily, and they're using new mediums to tell new stories. And I listen to The Daily every day, and it's not right-wing or left-wing. I think it's just pretty centrist, and it's very interesting. And that's what I think that's what Canadians are craving here at home. I think there's a huge lust for good, meaningful content about issues where it's just not drive-by smears and process. And we have, in Ottawa, we have the press gallery. They all drink at the same bar. They all know each other. It's so clubby. And they're not writing for, the mom in Whitby or the plumber in Kamloops. They're writing to please themselves. And I think there's a lot of great journalists, but too often we here in Canada, but for too often the press galleries are the ones that drive the narrative, and they're the ones that are doing a disservice to this country.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Whomever wants to get the mic, who gets to the mic first? And I'd ask you all to keep your answers short, please.
So if this is the last question, I'd just like to thank all the panelists. It's been a really entertaining discussion, and yeah. So you see it a lot in the United States, I guess, but there's some anxieties, particularly on the conservative end, of big social media giants banning certain commentators for their views on, whatever it might be going on today. Do you think that in this age where social media and I guess political discourse is mainly gauged and it's had out on social media, do you think it's appropriate that the conversation essentially be, social media giants are, sorry, hold on. Is it okay that social media giants basically can control it and decide who gets to say what? Or should it be something that the government maybe regulates, mandates, and there be a standard set that everybody has to follow, and it's something that the government should step in?
Who should be the arbitrator?
Well, I think it's very important that if you're spewing hate online, you should be banned. And I'm very proud of, Press Progress did an article on Faith Goldie this past week, digging into her donors that made her very annoyed at us, which I'm delighted about. And I'm not sure it's an either or in terms of your question. I think that if you're Facebook, if you're Twitter, if you're Instagram, you should be proactively clamping down on people who are using your platforms in objectionable ways, as well as common sense government regulation. I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a good thing that Facebook has finally started to get out ahead of this stuff. Even if it's difficult, even if you shut a voice down over here, pops up over here. These are big, complicated platforms. It's not easy, but it's critical that these kinds of voices be held accountable in social media space in the same way that they are in real life.
So if I can just jump in, I think nobody in this room would say that we want hate speech on Facebook. That's not the issue. The issue is who defines what hate speech is. And that's a very difficult question to answer. So recently on the Post Millennial, they did an article about how a number of academics and respectable people in this country were calling Quillette a white supremacist publication, which is very far from the truth, in my opinion, vastly untrue. So, it's scary when you get into this deplatforming business. We had actually Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin actually, even though I think Jordan Peterson was doing something close to $70,000 a month in user donations he was getting on Patreon, which for those of you who don't know, it's a crowdfunding platform. So he was making $70,000 a month in pure user donations and decided to abandon the platform because it had made some very arbitrary decisions with regards to deplatforming. So, we can all agree, no one wants hate speech, but it's problematic when you get to the point of who gets to define that. And I think very questionable to depend on the government to have common sense in that regard.
Taylor?
I am suspicious of concentrated corporate power, and I don't think we should be delegating decisions about what is and what is not hate speech to Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey or any of these people. I think those are decisions that should be made democratically. And the fact that we're not making them democratically now and just leaving it up to Facebook to decide, I think is a real problem.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that too. I think the concern, obviously hate has no no place in the public discourse, and Facebook has every right to ban people, but when they do so, they should give reasons. There's people who have been banned, and I want to know why Paul Joseph Watson or others have been banned. Tell us, what did they do wrong? And I think that would make everyone feel better, and that would give us more trust in these platforms. But there's also the debate whether Facebook needs to be broken up. They have so much power. We don't know how Facebook's news feed algorithm works. It is a little bit alarming to think about how much power Mark Zuckerberg has and how he can decide elections, how Google can filter search results. So these are things that we need to be cognizant of. But I'm worried that the solution will be worse than the problem.
And if you saw Zuckerberg in front of the Senate in the US, it was actually very comical. Like, for anyone who hasn't seen it, lawmakers trying to ask the necessary questions to really, hammer out some sort of regulation. Like, I think we're very far from the government, like the government really lags behind.
Thank you to all of you. Jeff, Jasmine, Taylor, Rick, a thoughtful conversation. Certainly we concluded not very much, but agreed on a few things, which I think is fascinating. Thank you to all of you, of course, for attending this evening. We hope that you were somewhat enlightened. Maybe a few of your questions got answered, but that's the challenge with this type of discussion, is there's far more questions yet to be posed. So thank you to the Empire Club for hosting us this evening.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, the Fresh Faces panel. And of course, that Rick Smith is the freshest of all the fresh faces. And I'm saying that for his kids, of course. Yeah, thanks, Rick. And we're going to invite our sponsor up. Thank you to Navigator for sponsoring this. And Mike Van Solen will be speaking on behalf of Navigator. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I will be brief. Navigator appreciated the opportunity to sponsor this event. We care a lot about conversations and how they take place in this country, and it was great to hear from 4 people who are doing this in dynamic and interesting ways, and really fascinating to hear their thoughts ahead of the next federal election. So on behalf of Navigator, on behalf of the panelists, thank you very much.
Quick announcements, everybody. There's been a bunch of concepts talked about tonight. One of them is hate speech. The Empire Club has decided to delve into this issue, and we have put together an event on June 13th that features Bernie Farber, Global TV's, Adrian, Global TV's Farah Nasser, and many academics and many others to come and talk about this issue in a real way, and that's on June 13th at lunch. So any of you interested in that, I hope you come. Our evening events, again, food will be served again in a minute. There's drinks coming back. So I want you guys to enjoy yourself tonight. There's one more evening event this season we have lined up so far, and that is Minister Mary Ng, who is obviously Minister of Small Business, and she is going to be moderating an event called Women Who Build, which is about women in the construction industry. There's very few of them. So they're talking about their issues, their challenges, their successes, and that's coming up next month. And we have also one more federal event, a federal politics event. CBC, we're doing CBC's Power and Politics live at the Empire Club on June 10th at lunch, so come out to that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.